Do we have definitive proof of life on other planets?
And that's been the question I've been excited about since I was a little kid, looking up at the stars and wondering who else might be out there. A lot of my work also asks that next question of who's living there? Is anyone living there? Could we actually try and find life? And there are many interesting ideas for how life could have begun. It does seem like life started very quickly, but the thing you have to be careful with that is that it took 4 billion years to go from whatever that first creature was all the way to us. And if that's typical, then Earth doesn't have that long left, and it's terrifying.
Dr. David Kipping is a professor of astronomy and astrophysics at Columbia University. He's here to definitively answer the question, is there life on other planets? And what can we be doing to prepare?
I try to remain very open-minded about what the real answer is. We have no idea what the motives of an alien would be.
We seem to have evidence of ancient microbial life on Mars.
When we talk about biosignatures, like the Martian rocks, or looking for gases in alien atmospheres, why do scientists feel comfortable calling that legitimate science, but we feel uncomfortable talking about UFOs as legitimate ways of looking for aliens? For astronomers, it's not a question of if. Surely there's someone out there, but it does raise the question, why would they have any interest in communicating with us?
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik.
And I'm Jonathan Cohen.
And welcome to our breakdown. We're very honored today to feature literally the guy whose job it is to search for life on other planets. We're talking to Professor David Kipping, and Dr. Kipping is a professor of astronomy and astrophysics at Columbia. He's the director of the Cool Worlds Lab. He also has a YouTube channel by the same name, Cool Worlds, with over 1 million subscribers. And Dr. Kipping is here to definitively answer the question, is there life on other planets? And what can we be doing to prepare for that information?
He also discusses the evolution of human life, how we got to this point, and what Earth will look like in 1 billion years, just a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms.
He's also going to talk about black holes, wormholes, the multiverse, and baby universes. All that and so much more. We are thrilled to have Dr. David Kipping join us. Dr. Kipping, welcome to the Breakdown. Break it down.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to finally be here.
We would love for you to start us off with what are you most excited about in terms of the work you do and what it means for the larger universe?
That's a great question. I mean, that's a very broad question. It's a very fair one. I do so many things that excite me, to be honest. My daytime job is looking for planets outside of the solar system and ideally trying to find moons around those planets as well. So we call these exoplanets. There's just planets outside the solar system. Technically, you could call planets inside the solar system endoplanets. Endo, like inside, but nobody ever calls them that. And then the moons around those planets we call exomoons. So we've been on this journey for the last 25, 30 years of going from absolutely no information whatsoever about planets outside our solar system. So maybe, you know, for all we know, it could have just been the 8 that we have in our backyard, and maybe that was it. I mean, people did seriously speculate about that. They looked at other stars and they said, you know, there could be something special about our own star. And now we know, when you look up at the sky, that on average, every star has at least one planet around it, often much more than that. So it's totally blown us away with just the numbers that are out there. And then yet more, the diversity. So we're just discovering every day you pick up one of the latest astronomy journals and you see what's being found. It blows our mind over and over again. We're finding so many planets that are in between the size of Earth and Neptune, for instance. And we just don't know what they are. Are they scaled up versions of a rocky Earth, super Earths, or are they scaled down versions of a gas giant, a gas dwarf? And we're still just totally in the dark, really, about the nature of those. Or maybe there could be something else entirely, like a water world or something. You know, these are the questions that get a lot of exoplanet scientists very excited. And then, of course, a lot of my work also asks that next question of, well, you know, who's living there? Is anyone living there? Could we actually try and find life? And for me, I mean, that's been the question I've been excited about since I was a little kid, was looking up at the stars and wondering who else might be out there. So, you know, we could talk about all of those things, but you know, that's a broad brush of all the stuff that gets me excited.
I mean, is Kevin Costner on the Waterworld planet is what I want to know, but that's probably outside of the scope of this conversation.
I mean, if the universe is infinite, then everything happens somewhere, right? So Kevin Costner's out there somewhere.
I just like thinking about David taking his lunch pail to work and being like, did I find life on other planets today? No? All right, not the best day. Let's keep going back.
It is often a journey of, I mean, that's what discovery is. Science is often like that, of highs and lows. So there's an emotional roller coaster involved in all of this. But generally, I think it's a very exciting time to be alive.
This is actually something I was discussing with my older son, who's 20, because we were stargazing the other night, and I was telling him that story that, you know, we old people, meaning someone who's over 40, will tell that, you know, memorizing the 9 planets was my main job in terms of my relationship to astronomy or the universe. That was my job as a kid, right? And that's sort of where things stopped for us. There was no internet for us to be looking things up. Our knowledge about the universe was incredibly vast and incredibly limited. And in just this one generation, I have a child who very casually understands that, oh, there's trillions and trillions of stars and planets and there's other galaxies, and like, we're not alone. You know, that's just like a normal thing, right? For this next generation to be experiencing. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the bridge? What would you say is kind of like the most definitive breakthrough that we have seen that allows us to go from there are 9 planets to there's actually only 8, and also there is so much beyond that we can now actually search for biosignatures. We can search for what it looks like when other planets possibly had life. What's that bridge? What happened in this generation?
Yeah, you know what? I think there's actually two. There's 2 bridges. One is conceptual, which is just purely in our own heads, really. We could have found exoplanets much sooner than we did, but it was us that got in the way. And another was technological, which is the obvious answer. So I'll give you the conceptual one first. So even in the 1970s, and even arguably in the 60s, we had the capability with our telescopes to measure the wobbles of stars at a level of precision which was enough to detect some existing known exoplanets that we've detected in the recent years. So to be able to do that, you have to be able to see a star move back and forth and see its speed change at order of hundreds of meters per second. And the very biggest planets, which are really close to the star, because obviously the closer the planet gets to the star and the heavier it is, the more it can tug that and make it move around and oscillate very fast. A good example is like, if you get a coin drop and you throw a coin down one of those charity wells and it speeds up as it gets closer and closer and closer and closer. And it's the same thing with planets. Like the closer in they get, the faster they orbit, and so the faster they tug the star that they go around. So some of those speeds were approaching thousands of meters per second, and we could have detected them back in the 60s and 70s. And actually in the 1950s, there was one astronomer, his name was Struve, Otto Struve, and he was completely forgotten about at the time, but now everybody cites him as kind of this genius who had this insight. But he pointed out that, hey, maybe sometimes Jupiter mass planets don't live really far away from their star, like Jupiter does and Saturn does. Maybe sometimes they get really close. And of course, everybody thought he was crazy. It was like, how... No, that doesn't make any sense. Like, we think we understand how Jupiter forms. You need lots of ices to make these gas giants, and ice would not be stable that close to a star. So, it would be too hot. So you can't possibly make a Jupiter that close. So everybody just kind of dismissed him. But we now know of many, many, many hundreds of these so-called hot Jupiters that were lurking in our data for years, even decades, without anybody just looking for them. So I think there's just a conceptual barrier that we grow up, as you say, man, like we grow up reading this textbook. Here's the solar system. Here's what it looks like. And I think for a generation or more of astronomers, it became ingrained in our minds that that was the template. Like everything else would look like that, more or less. And then when we found it was totally different, we went back and we're like, oh, damn, we could have found this stuff a long time ago. And then the big technological breakthrough was just CCDs. So, the same camera technology that we use in our iPhones and in video photography, like my DSLR camera I'm talking to you right now, that chip technology enabled a much higher quantum efficiency of capture of photons. And so we were able to go from basically, maybe capturing 10% of the photons to nearly 100% of the photons. So overnight with that technology, you get basically 10 times more photons and thus square root 10 higher signal to noise in your data. So that was a huge breakthrough as well.
Now I'd like you to take us to something that happened very recently, where we seem to have evidence of some sort of ancient microbial life on Mars. And this was something that when you posted about it, you said something very tender, for scientists among us. And what you said is like, my heart can't take it if this is not evidence of life on Mars. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about, if I were to ask you the basic question, do we have definitive proof of life on other planets? Where would this Mars data fit into that?
So speaking to my Mars colleagues, because I don't study Mars, I'm not a solar system planetary scientist, but speaking to my colleagues about this, the data is very tantalizing. So you see these kind of speckles which look like this sort of things that you get from microbial, from bacteria inside rocks. So that's enticing, but of course we don't have direct evidence of the bacteria in those rocks. We haven't collected a sample, we haven't brought it back to Earth, we haven't dissected it and pulled apart its DNA and been like, yeah, okay, now we're 100% sure this is life. So it is another example of a biosignature, I think would be fair to say. A very nice biosignature, but still an example of a biosignature. So that means a indirect telltale sign of life. But we've seen that before with Mars. So years ago, there was methane on Mars that was claimed. It's still there, and it's still a very provocative potential signal of life. But a lot of debate has started since then that maybe this is geological. Maybe there are methane traps deep inside, underneath the crust, that are leaking out sometimes, and it looks like this seasonal biological activity, but in fact, it could just be something geological going on. As the crust warms up, it releases some of this gas seasonally. We've also seen it most famously, I remember as a kid, going back, you have to be old to remember this, Bill Clinton stood on the White House lawn and talking about this famous meteor called the Allen Hills meteor. And it had these little worm-like fossils on it. And everybody was just so excited. Like, this seemed like the real deal of life on a Martian rock. This wasn't actually collected from Mars directly. This was a rock knocked off Mars that then traveled to the Earth, came through the atmosphere, landed in Antarctica, and someone picked it up and put it under a microscope. And that meteor still is very enticing, but in the years that followed, other laboratories were able to show that you could make something that looked very, very similar to those little worm-like things without any biology involved. Just kind of passing water and the minerals that you find on Mars together, you can sometimes get things that look like that. So that's always it's the story, and it took this like broken heart. This is this recurring tale that we've had over and over again, where we see something that looks like something we see with life on Earth, and then years pass sometimes, and scientists do all of that due diligence, and they find out there is another way of producing that signature. Now, that in itself doesn't prove it's not life, because it could, just because you can make it without life means it still could be life, but it provides an alternative rational explanation that doesn't require the aliens to be invoked. And normally, as you know, scientists tend to lean on like the simplest, dumbest idea we can get away with, the least sensational idea we can get away with. And so for these reasons, Allen Hills, Martian methane, and who knows what will happen with this one, but there has been a recurring story. So we just have to kind of be braced for that. Like, the lessons of history teach us that we often do get disappointed.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by IQ Bar, one of our absolute favorite snack, hydration, and coffee sponsors. IQ Bar protein bars, IQ Mix hydration mixes, and IQ Joe mushroom coffees are the delicious low-sugar brain and body fuel that you need to win your day. The Ultimate Sampler Pack is a great way to try all IQ Bar products and flavors. You get 9 IQ bars, 8 IQ Mix sticks, and 4 IQ Joe sticks. All IQ Bar products are clean label certified and entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial ingredients. They're packed with clean, delicious ingredients that keep you physically physically and mentally fit, like magnesium, lion's mane, and so much more. IQ Bar's plant protein bars are the smarter snack choice with plenty of plant protein, tons of fiber, and no added sugar. IQ Mix is a zero-sugar drink mix that hydrates with electrolytes, improves mood, and boosts clarity. IQ Joe is a mushroom coffee designed for mental clarity and packed with 200 milligrams of natural caffeine. Plus, it comes in 4 different flavors that will totally transform your morning routine. We look forward to the limited edition and seasonal flavors, too. When IQ Bar sent us their ultimate sampler pack, I instantly was interested in the coconut chip. That's the first one that I reach for. The bars taste great, and Jonathan will attest to any flavor because he loves them all, and I often find wrappers right here before we start recording. Right now, IQ Bar is offering our special podcast listeners 20% off all IQ Bar products, including the ultimate sampler pack, plus free shipping. To get your 20% off, text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. Text BREAKDOWN to 64,000. That's BREAKDOWN to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Shopify. Starting something new isn't just hard, it can be downright terrifying. So much time, so much effort goes into this thing in the pre-planning phase. You're not even entirely sure it will work out. It's hard to make that leap of faith. Trust us, we know. When we started this podcast, I wasn't really sure what Jonathan was even doing. What if no one wants to be on here? What if no one listens? What if I make a fool of myself? Well, now I know that Jonathan was right in believing in ourselves, despite all of my fears and hesitations. It also helps when you have a partner like Shopify on your side to help, like we do. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S. From household names to first-time business owners just getting started to a little podcast like Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. Shopify has been our one-stop shop for all of our merch store needs for several years now. Get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. Accelerate your efficiency, whether you're uploading new products or trying to improve existing ones. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. It's time to turn those what-ifs into with Shopify today. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/breakdown. Go to shopify.com/breakdown. That's shopify.com/breakdown. We have a strong interest, and as you said, we now have the technological capability to explore these things. Let's go to life on this planet, though. Before we sort of, kind of continue our pursuit of life on other planets, I remember sort of in basic biology lab, one of the first things we were taught about was, how do we try and create essentially us from nothing, right? And the model that was taught when I went to school, when I was an undergrad in the 90s, there was some unlikely, unexpected thunderstorm, and there were enough organic, ions floating around in some sort of primordial stew, right? That's what we were taught. And maybe lightning struck, which also, brings into this notion, the luck hypothesis, right? Lightning struck, and now, we are human. And there's a lot of steps in between. Can you talk a little bit about, obviously we've spoken to Robin Hansen and to people about like the panspermia hypothesis. What is it about the creation of life on this planet that seems to defy a lot of the sort of logical approaches we have to trying to understand how we got here?
I think the most challenging thing about trying to make any inference about life more generally based off us is this anthropic principle. So we are only here because we are here. There is a survivorship bias. So it's kind of like, taking all the lottery winners and putting them in a room and asking them, how lucky do you feel about playing the lottery again? And they'll be like, oh yeah, it's easy. Like you just buy a ticket and after 100 tries, you win the lottery. But that's not representative of most people. Like most people will play the lottery their whole life and never win. So there's a enormous bias in just taking winners. And we are a winner in this game of biological evolution and even the start of life itself. This story of how life started, of course, is a big mystery because, frankly, we don't have a time machine and there's very little relics left over from that long ago. We're talking basically 4.4 billion years ago when the oceans first formed on the Earth. There are very, very, very few rocks left from that time. And of course, if we are really arguing for a very simple microbial life form, perhaps it was the first thing to emerge, that would not leave much of a fossilized imprint for us to detect. So this is why this detective story is so difficult. And there are many interesting ideas for how life could have begun. I think we desperately just need another sample in terms of that origin story. And I've looked at this myself in my own research. I've asked the question, it does seem like life started very quickly. That seems like a good thing we believe. Like within the first few 100 million years, it looks like life was on the Earth. And so it's tempting to lean on that and say, therefore, whenever you have Earth-like conditions, it must be easy, because otherwise how did it happen so quickly? But the thing you have to be careful with that is that it took 4 billion years to go from whatever that first creature was all the way to us. And if that's typical, if it typically takes 4 billion years, then actually, surprisingly, the Earth doesn't have that long left. You kind of have to start life quickly in order to get to us. So maybe on most other planets, life starts, but it takes 2 billion years, 3 billion years, 4 billion years. That's fine. But those creatures would never have time, at least for a sun-like star, to develop into a creature like us, because the Earth will become uninhabitable to complex life in probably less than 1 billion years. We are already in the last chapter of the Earth's biological history. I think that's kind of a striking fact that we don't talk about enough. It's shocking. We're at the end of the story, not the beginning of Earth's history. It is, even on geological timescales, it is kind of a shocking thing to note. And so perhaps that explains why life started early, is that it was necessity to our existence. And in most places, that doesn't happen. So this anthropic effect makes it very difficult for us to say anything with firm confidence, except for the fact we know for sure it did happen.
That leads us back to this question about life elsewhere. Obviously, the Fermi Paradox is one of the easiest hard ways to think about this. But, there's something that is so precious, and also, in a culture of this planet, right, that has, kind of created religious organization in order to explain the things that we can't explain. Many people turn to something divine, something, for lack of a better word, alien, that must have had a hand in our evolution. How else would you explain it, right? And a lot of, sort of people from the religious perspective will say, well, if you can't recreate it in a lab, it's because you can't, because it needed God, right? So I wonder also, is there something special about us? And how big is your God? Is your God big enough to extend outside of this galaxy, right? That's sort of the question. Do we need that specialness to create life elsewhere, or can life exist, right, outside of our, sort of conscious perception of how things are created? Can you speak a little bit to that complexity, that we create?
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of things about even our solar system that we can say, because of the work we're doing with exoplanets, that is unusual. And the question is, to how much does that extend? How far does that rabbit hole go of uniqueness, of specialty? The Earth has a large moon, so that's already pretty weird. No other planet in the solar system out of the 8 planets. If you count Pluto, maybe this goes out the window, because Pluto has a very big moon comparatively as well. But out of the main 8 planets, no other planet has such a large moon. And it's thought to influence the tides. It's thought to influence the obliquity of the Earth. So that seems positive. Jupiter's influence has often been invoked as something that appears unusual. Less than 10% of sun-like stars have a Jupiter. And we can tell that from the exoplanet work we're doing. That means that just having 2 Jupiters in your backyard is actually pretty special already. Having nice circular orbits, coplanar orbits, is unusual. Having 8 planets is pretty unusual. Having a star which is as quiet as our star is unusual. If there was aliens looking for us, we'd be really easy to find. Our star is bizarrely quiet. It's like, but that's what gets in the way most of the time of us finding other planets, is the star misbehaving. Our star is almost like a light bulb. It's very easy to find us for an alien. So all these things are interesting, and they raise questions about uniqueness. And I love this connection that you bring up to religion and to theocracy, because we have this tendency in science, and it's one of the things I complain about sometimes amongst my colleagues, is that we see anomalies we see something strange that looks special, like the Earth does. Maybe it's an interstellar asteroid. Maybe it's a star that's doing something strange. And we see it, and it's an anomaly. And so we, like a burning bush, we inject a miracle to explain it, which is aliens. We say, there's this creature which can do anything. And that's kind of the problem with aliens. Like a god, they can explain any observation I give you. I can't, why did your alarm not go off this morning on time? Oh, aliens did that. Why did you not feel well last night? Was it the alcohol? No, it was aliens that did that. You can explain everything with aliens. And that's a problem for aliens as a hypothesis, because it shares that ability with a god. And so time and time again, we talked about Mars earlier on with these anomalies, these like methane or these worm-like fossils that were detected. But those were all anomalies that were later explained or explainable with other scientific rational explanations. And that has been this recurring theme in alien hunting for so long. There have been over a dozen claims in science of aliens out there. And every time it's taken a few years, but other people have come along and said, hey, I think we just don't understand the astrophysics well enough. Here's a way you can do that. So that is a weakness a little bit of the alien hypothesis that we don't talk about enough, that it's too malleable as a theory, but it is very rational to think that there could be someone out there doing this stuff. It's just that it's almost intellectually lazy to invoke it, because you can get away with murder when you invoke aliens. It's just like, oh, aliens did that, and you're done. You don't have to think anymore.
This notion that, the things that religion has allowed us to fantasize about in our culture, we've kind of replaced it with aliens, with energy, right? With spirituality, right? Like all of these things that are basically like, guess what? If you can't explain something, sometimes it just means we need more science. As kind of an amateur here, but I'm really torn between, on the daily being freaked out that we are conscious beings. Meaning, I'm one of those people who throughout the day will have these moments of, oh my goodness, like I exist, and like what's happening. And, I made a child into an adult. Like, how did that happen? Like, how am I here? So I spend a lot of time in that space. But when you expand that out and you say, like, how are we here? And we're on a hurling rock that's like kept in orbit because of this like moon, what? So when you then take that, like that's enough for me. Like I stopped in the 90s. That was plenty. But now we're living in this world again where we get to say, why would we be the only ones? What would give us the idea that we would be the only intelligent beings in this universe? Or why do I have to assume that life is carbon-based? It is here, but the whole point of something that's unfathomable is that it's unfathomable. So I'm kind of asking you, less as, an astrophysics, astronomy specialist, but more as like a human. What do you imagine? Like, what do you really imagine is going on outside of this galaxy?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I have ideas about what I hope to be true. I think we all kind of have these facts or facts that we believe in, because that's always debatable as well, what you consider to be a fact. But we have this set of facts, and then within those set of facts, we try to construct ideas which fit within all the information that we have in hand. So when I look at the information I have in hand, it's that, okay, we've been listening for aliens with radio waves for 70 years now, and we haven't seen anything. But that's okay, because maybe they're not using radio. Maybe, this is an antiquated technology for them. Who knows? So you can maybe just exclude that very narrow idea. There's probably not a lot of aliens out there who are screaming into the dark with radio waves. Otherwise, we probably would have detected something by now.
They're not like listening to Elvis Costello, like, why am I alive? Why can
Right.
no one hear me? My life is so miserable.
Right. I think just more broadly, there's not obvious aliens, and there's not like stars which are flashing on and off in a giving the prime number sequence or something. There's not laser pulses smashing at us every second. Right. Very, very bright, obvious aliens are not out there. We don't see stars that have mega engineering structures around them. We don't see some kind of giant manufacturing plant in the center of our galaxy, which, Carl Sagan speculated about for Sagittarius A star, the supermassive black hole. There's like lots of ideas we've had of like big obvious stuff, and we don't see any big obvious stuff. And so it is weird that everything we know from an astronomy perspective about the universe is totally consistent with it just being us, which is terrifying. There's zero sign anywhere of anything as far as we can tell, which is disturbing.
It almost makes one believe in God. It almost makes you believe in God.
You could definitely lean on that, or you could say what they're doing is just not detectable yet. We'll get there. It could be that there's plenty of worlds filled with microbes, for instance, and that might also fit into a view of your religion. You could say that there's microbial life everywhere, sure, but the idea of something getting as advanced as us is maybe very rare. And I think you can make a really strong argument scientifically that you would expect something like us to be pretty rare. There's so many strange flukes of evolution that led to us that it's easy to pull away one of those like Kerplunk, and you would just be left with something very simple again. So it's easy to make that case, but in cosmology at least, we believe the universe doesn't really have an end. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. And so like Kevin Costner with Waterworld, he will be out there, and there will be someone, including basically us, out there again. So I think for astronomers, it's not a question of if. I think we generally think that, yeah, surely there's someone out there, but maybe we are effectively alone. Maybe in our galaxy, there's no one else. Maybe there was no one else right now, but in the past there was someone else and they've died off, or in the future they'll come around. I often think about communicating with aliens as a challenge to talk through time, not through space. I think our best bet of communicating with another intelligence, this is pretty provocative, but I think our best bet is to talk to future intelligences that will evolve on Earth. Because the Earth has hundreds of millions of years left to go.
Wait. Talk us through that.
Yeah. So, think about the last major mass extinction was when the dinosaurs got knocked off. So this was 65 million years ago. That's very quick in evolutionary timescales. That's not that long. So you've gone from rodents, these very simple mammals, evolving all the way up to us in tens of millions of years. Not that long on astronomical geological timescales. So my provocative, and it is I'm not an evolutionary biologist, but this is just a pet theory I have, is that intelligence will come back. I don't know what's going to happen to us. Maybe we'll spread towards the stars. Maybe we'll extinguish ourselves. I don't know. But I do think that intelligence is in enough places in the animal kingdom at this point. It's in dolphins, it's in octopi, it's in birds, it's in mammals, that I think intelligence has an evolutionary advantage that will in somehow persist. And so I would bet it's much more likely than us hearing from an alien from the other side of the galaxy, that we could build a time capsule, place it on the moon, that maybe some advanced future descendant on the Earth would detect that and pick it up and learn about us. I think my bet is that that's a more likely way of us having a one-way communication with an alien species, effectively, even though it's still descended from Earth, than that's actually getting a two-way communication through a radio pulse or something with Alpha Centauri. That's just a pet theory, but that's what I tend to lead on.
I think you would have made a terrific evolutionary biologist. I'm really digging this. Well, I'm also thinking I've never used AI, which is something I'm still proud to say. But if I were to create an image or ask AI to help me, I would want them to show me an image of a dolphin and octopus, in a time capsule that I'm placing on another planet. That's like a visual that I want. I want all those creatures together.
AI can do it.
The AI can do that, but I'm not going to try it out. The other thing that I was hoping maybe you could help us understand, because I think that's helpful for what might be brewing. But, we've spoken to Adam Frank, we've spoken to, all these people who have helped us sort of entertain the what could have been. And obviously people like Robin Hanson who are a little more out there. But what about the notion that if we assume that there could be other intelligent life, it likely has been around for a much longer time than us, and may have even advanced to a level of, I mean, like, I'm thinking like, I'm kind of like a Jetsons, I was raised on the Jetsons, right? So I'm thinking like,
Yeah, me
it's
too.
like, right. So I'm thinking like, it's like a computer with legs, like that's what I'm thinking. But whatever version of advanced artificial intelligence, that something that has been alive for, I don't know, pick a number, hundreds of millions of years, is it possible that we are the most primitive life form and that there's something that has already existed and we're just at the tail end and the beginning of our exploration?
For sure. I mean, yeah, Carl Sagan would often comment on that it's very unlikely, if there is another intelligence out there, that it would be in technological lockstep with us, right? It's either going to be far behind us, in which case there's not really much prospect of communication, or far ahead of us. And in fact, me and Adam Frank actually wrote a paper about that together, saying that, if you look at the neighborhood of stars around us and assume there is someone else out there, they're almost certainly going to be far ahead of us. And so we should just sort of brace for that in communication. But it does raise the question, maybe that's the explanation to the Fermi Paradox. Why would they have any interest in communicating with us, right? Because we'd be so simple and primitive to them that we'd be maybe interesting in the sense of putting us in a test tube and seeing what happens, but not for like an actual sentient communication. Maybe there's some higher plane of consciousness we've not achieved yet. So they just don't even consider us like worthy of empathy and all of these things. Maybe that's even an alien concept to them. So, that's very worrying. The case I worry most about is that you can imagine a planet that has a single-celled life form that forms a colony on that planet, like a fungus that just kind of spreads over the whole planet. And like a neural network, it could be very intelligent. We know that bees collectively and ants collectively have this kind of collective sense of intelligence that can emerge. And so there might be hyper intelligences out there that just have no concept of mutual understanding with us. Like even the idea of another species to them wouldn't make any sense, because they're the only thing they've ever known. So even the idea of individuals and consciousness wouldn't make any sense to them. And so there might be lots of aliens out there, but they're just so alien that this science fiction dream we have of like shaking hands and talking to each other over a dinner table, that's all BS. There's no way that's going to happen. They're not humanoid. They're probably not even made of the same stuff of us, as you say. So I think we have to change our expectations about what that really might look like. And that worries me, because then what prospect is there really of this fantasy that we all probably have deep down of that learning from another species?
You also could be talking about men and women trying to communicate in any reasonable way.
Right. Isn't that was exactly what I was talking about.
No, but I was thinking like 60 years ago, this conversation was probably had about, I know you're going to try and communicate with women, but it's just not going to happen. They're like made of different stuff. But I was thinking of like, what are those differences and how much can we magnify them? Many people are talking about the age of disclosure, and not just the documentary, but the sort of era that we are in. And when I was a kid, when we were all kids, there was always like a lone person who was featured in, let's say, the National Enquirer, or maybe they made it onto, the evening news on some special, and they claimed that they had contact or information or evidence. And, these things were fairly sporadic. And I'd say over the last, fill in the number of decades you'd like, and also with the proliferation of information and the ability to distribute that information, we've had a huge explosion in people talking about not only experiences, abductions, evidence, all these things. There's been a huge emphasis on what the government knows, what the government doesn't know. As far as I'm concerned, I've stopped being alarmed when I hear that the CIA or FBI has looked into something. Apparently they look into everything, like the local 7-Eleven and also, biosignatures. So it's not so much like, oh, the government has a department, but what we're learning is that there are larger networks, both of conspiracies and also truths about things that our government has placed tax dollars to fund and to support. We've spoken to the vast variety of people you can imagine who talk about this. What is your understanding of the elements of the age of disclosure that we're in? What is actually going on? What might be going on? What should we be worried about? And how does it affect the actual science?
Yeah, I mean, I get asked this all the time. And the thing I've been thinking a lot about with this growing era of UFO stories and age of disclosure is how do we pass that as scientists? And I think for a long time, the public has been frustrated with scientists because we just kind of dodge the question. And we say, well, that's silly, that's ridiculous, I'm not going to even talk about that. And I don't think that's the right approach. But at the same time, I think a lot of scientists do have this kind of spider sense that something doesn't make sense about this. I mean, as astronomers, for instance, it's hard to find people that look up at the sky more than astronomers, professional astronomers, and yet none of us, very few of us, seem to see this compared to the bulk population. So what's going on? Why is it that trained professionals see UFOs less often than members of the public who are untrained at looking at things? So that already might raise some red flags, what's going on here? But I don't want to discount it. I think there is, obviously when you see these videos and you see the Pentagon videos and you hear these reports of the radar operators and the pilots, these are very well trained people as well, right? And so they're seeing stuff in US airspace or just off the coast of US airspace that clearly something is going on, and it's totally reasonable. And I support the government trying to figure out what that is, because at a minimum, it poses a potential threat to U.S. defense, right? If there's vehicles traveling through our airspace without us knowing about it, we probably should find out what they are, whether they're drones or some alien spacecraft. We probably want to know what they are. So we certainly want to pursue it. I wouldn't be one of those scientists that said this is so ridiculous, let's just close that case and forget about it. But I've also been trying to ask myself the question, why is it that when we talk about biosignatures like the Martian rocks, or looking for gases in alien atmospheres, right? We do that with exoplanets. We look for gases that are signatures of life as well. Why do scientists feel comfortable calling that legitimate science, but we feel uncomfortable talking about UFOs as legitimate ways of looking for aliens? It's not like suddenly as soon as you cross the Earth's atmosphere, something stops being science. That doesn't make any sense. There's no boundary like that. And for me, I've been thinking about this really hard. I think what it comes down to is there's a little bit of a technical explanation, but I think it comes down to knowing how often you're wrong and how often you're right. What in science we would call the true positive rate and your false positive rate. And in any experiment, you have to know those two numbers. If I'm going to do a search for life on exoplanet atmospheres using whatever method I want, I need to know how often do I expect this method to be successful if all of those planets had life on it. Is it 50%, is it 100%, or is it 1%? So that's the true positive rate, how often you're going to be right, assuming life is there. And you also have to know how often you're going to be wrong. Assuming none of the planets had life, how often would you erroneously turn around and claim that you found life? You have to know those two numbers. And I think the problem with these reports I've seen, at least, is that there's no way I can think of to measure those two numbers and thus even ingest UFOs into the framework of science. I don't even know that it's compatible with science without those two numbers. Because you'd have to know, for instance, with pilots, put pilots in an airspace where you knew with certainty there was no aliens, and ask how often do they erroneously claim aliens. And you can't do that. It's not possible. You could put them in a simulator or something, but even that wouldn't be realistic compared to actually flying the vehicle in an atmosphere, in a real physical atmosphere. And likewise, there's no way to know if you put them in an airspace with aliens, how often do they correctly identify them as aliens? There's no way you could do that. So the problem is, just from an experimental perspective, it's all anecdotal, and it's very difficult to have the controlled lab-like conditions where we can evaluate those numbers and ask these questions in a meaningful way. It could be possible in some cases to ask those things. We could imagine networks of mobile phones tracking these things, everyone's cell phone capturing them in real time, getting trigonometry of their locations, having magnetometers on everyone's phone. And I think the NASA UAP task force advocated for that. They said, look, we could turn everyone's phones into UFO collecting devices. And there's even some apps that on the App Store now that you can sort of use to try and do this. But that's the kind of level of fidelity you need. You need like lots of data from independent sources, and then you'd be able to measure some of these rates in a more controlled set of conditions. But at the moment, just with these kind of one-off anecdotes, I just don't know what to make of them.
Well, there are two sides to this, right? It's like the scientific evidence, and then how do you make sense of these group of professionals, seemingly all credible in their own way. Like it's a big conspiracy that they've all had these unbelievable experiences and they're just doing it to go on talking tours of podcasts, and they're sitting in front of congressional hearings claiming that there's undisputed evidence that is being withheld. Like, how do we reconcile those two things?
I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. I mean, I wouldn't accept personal testimony as evidence for aliens, personally. I think my bar of evidence is higher than Dave said so. Even if Dave, I really believe Dave. Even if Dave's my best friend and you know, he's got a PhD in whatever, that's still not enough, just because someone said so. So, you know, it's like Jerry Maguire, show me the money. Like then I'll believe it. Like if there are alien vehicles in some warehouse, some government warehouse, then just present them and we'll all be convinced. And I think that's the point of not just science, but in society more generally. If you want to convince someone of an idea, then you for it to be convincing and to become factual, then there has to be no room for wiggle room, right? There can't be, and that's how scientists work. We always try and find, okay, did you think about this? What about this assumption? What about this? And we attack it from all angles until whatever the idea is, it's like a crucible. You've burnt away all the irrelevances, and you've just got this like pure fact that's left over, and it is undeniable that this, you know, gravity is undeniable because we've all done the experiment millions of times, and it always falls down to the ground. There's no denying it at this point. We've tried every way we can to deny it, and we're a long way from that with the current claims. But I would like us to get there because I, like everybody else, just want to know the answer. But in terms of like what's personally going on with these people, I have no idea. I think you need probably a psychologist to figure that out, not an astronomer. But it's also possible they're all right and there is something going on, and we just the evidence for whatever reason is constantly being withheld from scientists, and yet paradoxically, all these SETI scientists and astronomers doing all this work, for whatever reason, we never see a UFO in our telescope data, which is I find that hard to make sense of, but you could imagine some contrived situations where that's true.
I'm struck by sort of, you know, both Jonathan's, you know, kind of question and sort of the explanation that you have. I mean, I think it hadn't occurred to me that there would be ways that we could actually legitimately try and track this stuff. Like, meaning when you said that about like phones and like real time, like that makes a lot of sense. It had never occurred to me, but I think that sort of is the place where we can bridge the sort of conversations of people who say the things that I'm experiencing and observing cannot be measured, and you either have faith or you don't. Right? Which actually just isn't the way that science works. And if you'd like to believe in angels and fairies, like that's totally fine. But if we're going to try and have a conversation about how we bring that into a larger conversation, that it has to have some sort of rigor. It has to have data. It has to have the ability for us to run stats on it. That's just true. And it reminds me, I mean, we made you an evolutionary biologist. Maybe we'll make you a therapist today. It does remind me of a lot of the things that people, let's say, want to lean into regarding extrasensory perception. The ability to telepathically communicate, all of these things that are sort of outside of the realms of what science is able to articulate. I'm just curious what those other, kind of connection points might be for us to be able to say this can exist as an independent experience, but that's not the same thing as us being able to understand it from a global, human, scientifically rigorous perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to remind people of human biases, and this is one of those very difficult situations where a lot of us have strong biases. Most people, I think, tend to favor, they would like there to be an alien species out there, but many people feel the opposite way as well. But there's a polarizing view about what they want to be true, and we've seen time and time again in science. I mean, I can think of one of the very first claims of alien life was on the front page of the New York Times in 1908 or 1906, maybe it was. And it said it was the New York Times. It said, "There is life on Mars." That was the headline. There's no two ways about that headline. That's an unambiguous statement of fact. There is life on Mars, because this astronomer at the time over 100 years ago, Percival Lowell, was looking through a telescope and he saw lines on Mars, and he thought those lines were canals. And now we look back and say, that's ridiculous. Like, why would aliens build canals? That's an antiquated technology. But at the time, that was a technology that was emerging, and he was surrounded by canals because the Erie Canal was just going up. So to him, it made sense that that's what an advanced species would do. But of course, this is this idea of like the alien. The alien could be so alien that's just laughable. The idea of flying vehicles through space might be a joke to a very advanced civilization. Why would they do that, such a thing? When you could just learn everything from a neutron probing telescope from the other side of the universe? Why do you even need to visit them? We have to kind of open our mind a little bit about how advanced they really could be. And of course, he was wrong. Percival Lowell was wrong, but he just didn't know what he didn't know. And what he didn't know was that these psychological effects, it's called gestalt reconfiguration, where if you see like three dots in a row, you kind of connect a line between them, and his brain just filled in the gaps. And that just wasn't understood at the time, that this was an effect. And so time after time, it's the stuff we don't yet know about. And even in our own atmosphere, there's stuff we don't know about. During the NASA UAP task force, led by Dave Spergel, who's an astronomer, they talked about this upside down lightning effect. I think it's called jellyfish or red lightning, and it shoots up, and it's only in the very upper atmosphere. And pilots have been reporting it for years. Commercial pilots have been saying there's this weird lightning, but it was never recorded. No one had ever had a camera fast enough to capture this inverted red lightning. And then once cameras got fast enough, they finally proved that it was real. But nobody thought it was real until it was done. And so that's both a case of maybe the aliens are real because we don't have the quality of cameras yet, but it's also a case of that there's natural phenomena in our own atmosphere that we're still like learning about, that we don't understand. So we have to be humble and admit that our understanding of even our atmosphere is probably going to advance a lot more in the next century, and there may be stuff going on we just don't understand that we will come to understand, because that's how science works. Or it could be aliens, but I do think we should just be a little bit humble that time and time again through history we've got overexcited because we want it to be true, we want it to be aliens, and very often, at least so far in history, it has not been that case. It's just a lack of our current understanding of what's going on.
I mean, you could also make that argument for, everything we've ascribed to God, everything, again, that we're ascribing to energetic fields that we just can't measure yet. You could ascribe it to telepathy or what seems like telepathic communication. Jonathan and I are sort of recreationally fascinated with things that people used to think weren't a thing that are a thing, right? So, when we discovered that, fascia actually exists in your body and it's really important, and releasing, pain from, let's say, a traumatic accident to your shoulder can actually be felt throughout your body and cause changes like that blew, the world of body work wide open.
It also changed, medical doctors who once said that nothing you thought in your head had any physiological impact, which is now quite silly.
So we're just sort of, we're fascinated that, you can pick up radio waves through a filling in your tooth. But before we realized that's what was going on, there were people who were like, I'm hearing voices in my head. And, that's a thing that's happening. And in addition, just to throw the government under the bus a little more, the government has done some really shady, messed up experiments with people and convinced them that nothing is implanted in your head. And these people have, shown up at VA hospitals saying they implanted something in my head and they're put on Thorazine and we hope we never hear from them again. And then it comes out that the government indeed was doing psychological research and sometimes implants things in people's brains, right? So I think that there's also this notion of like aliens is sort of our next stop, right? It's the next stop for I can't explain this and maybe you just can't measure it yet. But I love this notion that this is why we are human. This is the way that evolution works. This is the way that we create things. This is the way that we create the environments with which we continue doing research so we can find out more. And we may not find out, for example, when we study telepathy, that people are telepathically communicating on a different plane of consciousness that can be accessed, through their heart. But we may learn other things about human communication, about nonverbal communication, and about so many other things that will add, to sort of the stew that is our scientific knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, like trees communicating through the fungal network. I mean, that's like an example. That just seemed crazy when you first hear about it. But an example in my world I think of is meteors, actually. Like the idea of, in the 18th century, of rocks raining from the sky is such a weird thing. It's like pigs flying, and nobody believed it. They were like, come on, like how could a rock fall out of the sky into your backyard? That doesn't make any sense,
right?
And then of course now we accept it as common fact because in northern France, I think it was near Normandy, there was like thousands of them in one meteor shower, and it was just like at that point there was no escaping the conclusion.
It was a bunch of farmers, and everyone was like, "Those crazy farmers, they're so dumb." That's literally what people said.
Right, but the evidence got to I think this is what we always want in science, is the evidence got so overwhelming that the naysayers had no route of escape, right? The evidence in that crucible, it became undeniable. And that's always what we're chasing, I think, in science, is we want to remove all of that uncertainty until we're left with something that really looks like a factual point. And I hope we get there with this. I think in 50 years from now, maybe we'll look back and we'll be like, okay, that's what all the UFOs were. It was either aliens or maybe it was something else. But we're obviously a long way from that at this point. We do not understand what these things are. It's being reported at such a high rate that it demands some investigation. But is the evidence at a level for me to say that therefore means aliens? No, it's not. But I'm open to the idea, and I think that the lesson from history over and over again is that we're often wrong. Humans are often wrong. So I just try to remain open-minded about the possibilities and say the evidence isn't there to convince me yet, but that doesn't mean I'm saying you're wrong. I'm trying to keep everything on the table and just collect data until we get to the point where it's overwhelming. And that's what we want to achieve. And for some people that's frustrating because they just want to make the call now. Just make the shot. Just say, I want the certainty. But science isn't like that. Science builds confidence progressively through many, many experiments. And it takes those kind of windfall detections sometimes, like those 1,000 meteors in northern France, to truly convince everyone that it's real.
I'm wearing this T-shirt that Jonathan got me, which I like very much because I like, anthropomorphizing aliens. But, there's a lot of conversation. And we recently had on a man who claims to be channeling an alien hybrid. Different story. His name is Bashar, and people all over the world listen to the channeling of Bashar. But one of the things that Bashar talks about, and one of the things a lot of people talk about, is that aliens are wanting our DNA. and they are, performing abductions, and they are, placing probes, and, all these things. And it's been the subject of many incredible movies, right? Trying to understand what an interface, right, with aliens might look like. Can you imagine a world or a galaxy or a universe where aliens would be at the level of sophistication where they could, for example, fly about undetected, but then selectively drop in? If they were at that level of sophistication, why would they want our DNA that they have to suck through our nose with a probe? I'm asking for a friend, but I'm asking for, for sort of I'm not just trying to be, cheeky here. I'm saying that, like, where is that level of interface, and how do we have conversations? Do we just shut that down and say, guess what? Anything that can fly undetected doesn't need to then suck you into a UFO? Or do we say all bets are off, and maybe there are beings that are operating on a level that we literally can't understand?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that argument by some of my colleagues that it doesn't make any sense why UFOs, if they're so advanced, would be undetectable in some data and then trivially detectable by eye, with a human eye, in other data, or with a simple camera in other data. I mean, it is often, by the way, with cameras, I always find it amazing that the best image of a UFO hasn't improved since 1950, right? Camera technology has exploded, and yet we still have this grainy, crappy photo every time. That's maybe a red flag, right, to some degree. But in terms of the motives, it's impossible to debunk it. I think it's a waste of time to try to debunk motivation, because we have no idea what the motives of an alien would be. Maybe it's a teenager who's drunk and he's just flying around, messing with us. I don't know. Like, you can't, whatever you say to someone who really is a believer about that, they're not going to accept that as a counter argument. I think when I hear these stories, and I would never tell someone, well, you're wrong, that didn't happen, because I don't know, I wasn't there. There must be some bare minimum who are either fantasizing this or having a waking dream or something. That would be it'd be weird if that wasn't true, because we have such vivid imaginations. You'd expect some fraction of the time that would be true. And Jill Tarter, who's often, the movie Contact was about her. And Carl Sagan wrote the book Contact with her in mind. She's sort of seen as the mother of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. She has this beautiful quote where she says that, when we look for aliens, it's like a cosmic mirror. And what we're really looking for is a reflection of our own fears and our own dreams and aspirations. And so when we look for a planet that we think is undergoing nuclear war, that is a reflection of our own fear of nuclear war. And when we look for a planet that has achieved, solar panels covering the planet, that's a reflection of our own dream of achieving this kind of eco-utopia. And, maybe with some of these stories of, medical experiments or whatever, those are, again, reflections of our own internal fears that are just manifesting in these different ways. And I do think that's very true, that everything we think about aliens is pretty much just, it's coming from us. It's a manifestation of our own aspirations and dreams. And so I think that is there's a lot of us in these stories more than there is aliens in these stories.
I mean, all of our narratives have that aspect to them, whether it's extrasensory abilities, God, aliens as well. We're all trying to find our place, right? And how we fit and how the world around us works. What I'm about to say, I don't think contrasts that, but in the same regard, it does shed more light and intrigue on the things that we used to think are ridiculous. And recently, the Havana Syndrome has come up again as one of the topics that was dismissed over and over again, where these people are experiencing very intense medical issues, headaches, nausea, impacts on their vision. And it was totally dismissed like they're absolutely crazy. And now 60 Minutes, through 9 years of research, has been releasing episodes on the fact that there are some crazy, previously unknown weapons that could shoot wavelengths that impact people in a way that we could never have imagined. So I think people hear that and then get to thinking they're like, well, what else really can't we
to extrapolate from that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I agree with you that we need evidence, but it's like sometimes in the absence of enough evidence, people are trying to put those pieces together and say, what else haven't we just figured out yet?
Yeah. I mean, I was reading recently about a story that reminds me of is alchemy and Isaac Newton with gold. So, people were convinced at the time you could probably turn base metals into gold, especially lead was thought you could turn to gold. And it seems strange to us, but, at the time it was thought, well, if this was true, this would be great and we could become rich. And we really wanted it to be true. And so that's kind of an important bias. And I always think it's amazing that Isaac Newton, we didn't know this until we discovered his writings in the 20th century, but he spent as much time doing inventing calculus and physics as he did trying to turn lead into gold. And it seems, in hindsight, bizarre that he would do that. But, he was motivated by not only this dream of what he wanted to be true, but just there were these stories at the time, right, that this could be possible. There were these people who were saying, these charlatans mostly, who were saying, to kings, I can turn lead into gold. And so I think the lesson is not not to dismiss the Havana Syndrome thing at all, but just that we're often wrong. I think that's the lesson, that we often hear these rumors, and when these rumors originally come out, it's very difficult to say whether it will pan out to a yes or a no. And so that's why I try to remain, with UFO stuff, just very open-minded about what the real answer is. But I don't think the lesson to take away is these rumors often end up being true. I think because we've seen time and time again, it goes the complete opposite direction as well. There are many cases where it ends up being true, but there's also a lot of cases where it was complete BS, and we forget about those cases. And we have that problem in medical journals and nutritional science a lot, where you hear about the positive cases. Oh, eating tomatoes, increased your libido by 10% or something like this. But you never hear about the negatives, where they did that experiment 10 times, it made no difference, but they couldn't get it published because no one wanted to publish that stupid no result. And so we often don't give as much emphasis as probably we should to all the times that we were wrong. And when you put that all together, you get this balanced picture that we often make mistakes and we often mess up, and that's the nature of how science works.
Well, and I think also, one of the things that, persnickety people like me get very frustrated about is, yes, it's important and amazing that we can disseminate information and people can look things up about their health and learn things about the world in ways that they previously could not. But many people sort of don't know what to look for or how to read data. And, I think we've all learned bits and pieces about how, for example, pharmaceutical companies can selectively publish the data that supports the mass dissemination of medication that actually may not be doing what they say that it does, right? That's astounding and makes me lose faith in humanity, but that's for a different episode. But I think that this is one of those things that when you have, also a political climate for us where we're told not to trust, it sort of grows this sort of notion that my experience is the entire experience. And what I think when I read an article is true, as opposed to what is the data. And, I go over this with my mother, God bless her, who will see something on Instagram and say, oh my gosh, I didn't know that, insert the food, the treatment, the celebrity, like whatever it is. And I think that's sort of something that, for people who are kind of trained in the ivory tower of academia, there is a different set of standards, right? And that doesn't necessarily translate well to kind of popular media.
Yeah, for sure.
I'd like you to take us down a black hole, because one of the other things we wanted to talk to you about was black holes. The sort of simple notion of why black holes don't make sense. Can you walk us through, for someone who's like, I really want to, and we've had Jan 11 on, like literally the black hole person, but I wonder if you can try and walk us through a layperson's explanation, because I think a lot of people want to understand this, and they want to understand the conflict that happens when we imagine a black hole, and it opens up the possibility, obviously, for conversations about wormholes. But if you can talk a little bit about sort of like energy conservation and, mass conservation and things like that, help us understand what we should know about black holes, why they should delight us and confound us, and also what some possible explanations are for the paradox that they present.
Yeah, so I think probably the biggest paradox you're alluding to there is this thing known as the black hole information paradox. Black holes are just incredible. It's actually wild to think they're really out there. And sometimes you just have to like take a step back and think, this is not just like an idea. Like, we know those actually exist, and it's terrifying. There's these things out there which nothing can escape from. I think it's such a bizarre idea. But I guess the paradox here is that we know that there's plenty of black holes. There's probably of order of like 1 million or so in our own Milky Way. We only know of maybe dozens in our own Milky Way that have these accretion disks. That's when stuff is falling in, it rubs together, a lot of friction, it gets very hot, and we can see it. But there's probably lots of black holes which are almost naked. They're just floating through space. There's nothing really falling into them at the moment, and so we just can't see anything. They are black, of course. That's why you can't see them. The paradox of them is really about what happens to the stuff that falls in.
I'm sorry, wait a second. Did you just say they're floating around?
Well, maybe not floating is the right word, but they are moving through space, yeah, with some peculiar velocity, yeah.
Okay, this is something I've never thought about. I've always studied black holes or thought about black holes as sort of like static. They have the ability to move, though. This is a new piece of information for me.
Well, it's not like by their own power per
Sure.
se, but everything in the galaxy is moving.
Right.
So I mean, the solar system is orbiting around the center of the galaxy,
right,
and has a fairly circular orbit. But there are some objects which are orbiting on highly elliptical orbits, and they're not stable. They will move around. We had an interstellar asteroid, 3 of them, pass through the solar system quite recently. So stuff can hit each other, can go through solar systems. It's a messy, busy place out there.
Okay, got it. It's just like it changes a little bit of the computation that I'm doing about them to picture them as a receptacle for potentially everything that never comes back, and we don't know what's happening in there, but also it moves about, because then it asks the question, like, what vector are things moving on if it's... Anyway, okay, keep going.
Yeah, I mean, there is a chance a black hole could pass through the solar system. It'd be a very bad day for us, right? It's possible. It's not very likely, but it is possible. I wouldn't lose sleep about that particular chance, but it is possible. But the question is, what happens to stuff that falls in? When something falls in, obviously, it adds to the mass of the black hole. So if you throw in a book, like an encyclopedia, with all of the words and the information inscribed on those pages, at the very basic level, the black hole just gets one encyclopedia heavier. That's about it. That's all that really happens to it. And I think we could live with that if that was the end of the story. We could be like, well, the information on those pages, and even just the matter itself, more at a quantum level, is just somehow hidden behind that event horizon. It stays there forever, and that's okay. But the problem that black holes introduced was really because of Stephen Hawking, who suggested that they lose mass over time. They evaporate. And we now have, we haven't got direct evidence that they do this, but it is widely accepted that this has to be true to make sense of them with quantum theory. You can actually see this happen with acoustic versions of black holes. So you can create kind of sonic versions of black holes in the laboratory, and they also produce this so-called Hawking radiation, where they will evaporate over time. So we really have lots of reasons to think this is something they really do. It just happens on vast timescales. I mean, trillions and trillions and trillions of years that they will slowly lose mass. So eventually the black hole goes away. This mass will just completely disappear, and it will just pop out of existence at a certain point far in the future.
Yeah, that's troubling, because you're thinking of all the mass that has been added to it as it goes around the galaxy like a giant trash can from which there is no return. Things just can't disappear. Matter cannot just disappear.
Right. So I think the energy and the mass conservation, we're okay with that, actually, because all the mass that goes in comes back out as photons, and of course equals mc squared. So you can keep all your books in order there. The account, if you're measuring your budget, everything makes sense. The problem is information, actually, not necessarily mass. There was this, complex information, this entropy encoded within that book, and presumably it hits the singularity. If you calculate how long it takes for things to hit the singularity, it's not that long. It's of order of, depends on the black hole, but it could be anywhere from seconds to hours. So eventually this stuff will hit the singularity. And the singularity is thought, we don't know, no one's ever peered inside one, but it's thought to be this point of infinite density. And so that is complete destruction of any information. It should totally destroy it. So then this raises a problem with quantum theory, because quantum theory says all processes are essentially reversible. That if you write down the Schrödinger equation, the equation of how we think systems evolve in a quantum universe, you can always time reverse them and get and everything makes sense. Whereas here you can't time reverse it, right? Because it's destroyed. There's an end point to the story. You can't go back. Once it's crossed that horizon, the information's gone. And so this kind of violates, a simpler way to think about it is just that quantum theory demands information conservation. There's the conservation of energy, the conservation of mass, and quantum theory says there should be a conservation of information. And black holes seem to just ruin that story for quantum theorists. And so this is where there's a fascinating intersection of general relativity, which is a theory of how space-time folds and moves and bends, of which one of the consequences is a black hole, and quantum theory, which is the theory of the very, very small. And it's black holes seem to be the keyhole where both of those two worlds talk to each other in a way that we don't see with almost any other system. And so that's why I think so many particle physicists, quantum physicists, and cosmologists, everyone in the physics world are so fascinated with them, because they can solve so many problems because they are the bridge between all of these different scales, in a sense. And so there's a lot of work going on, a lot of thinking. I'm sure Jana spoke about some of this, about how can that information get out, because it has to for this theory to make sense.
What about this kind of concept of wormholes? Obviously, this is something real that has been expanded in, kind of popular culture to include conversations about, kind of anomalies like the, sci-fi show, or even sort of the multiverse. Can you speak a little bit to wormholes and how that leads to these other conversations?
Oh yeah, it's actually my last video on Cool Worlds was all about wormholes. So it's very well timed, because I spent a lot of time researching wormholes in preparation for that video. People originally thought black holes could be connected to wormholes in a sense. And Einstein actually wrote about that with this idea called the Einstein-Rosen bridge. But the version he imagined was not a wormhole a human being or even a particle could ever take. It was a slice through space, but particles always have to go forwards through time. And because of the very fact we have to go forwards through time prevents you from ever tunneling through the black hole and coming out of the other end of what would be some kind of hypothetical wormhole or hypothetical extra universe. So if you look at the math, you can kind of reflect the math and predict, oh, there should be another universe. There should be the inverse of the black hole, the white hole on the other side. And in principle, if you could travel infinite speed, you could kind of work your way through that. But in real physics, it's doesn't seem possible. So then Kip Thorne, who of course famous for Interstellar, because he was the science advisor on the movie Interstellar, he was actually prodded by Carl Sagan to start thinking about this. And Carl Sagan, when he was writing Contact that we've already mentioned, was asking Kip Thorne, is there a way, I know the Einstein-Rosen bridge doesn't work, but could you imagine a way of making this work? And so him and Morrison Thorne came together, and they came up with an actual traversable wormhole. It really did work. And they kind of reverse engineered it. They said, well, here's a wormhole. Let's solve the equations to figure out what the mass has to look like to create it. And the solution they came up with works, but it requires this weird thing of negative energy. And so that's where everyone kind of scratched their head and was like, well, how would you do that? There are some examples of negative energy that we know of, like the Casimir effect, for instance, in physics. But this would be a huge amount of it. You're talking like Jupiter masses of negative energy put in one place, but maybe an advanced civilization could do that. And then further, I think people often stop there and they say that's the big problem, that you need negative energy. But you also need to basically take two regions of space-time and glue them together by the negative energy. That's actually the harder part. It's not It's not having the negative energy in one place. It's then grabbing somehow, like a god, grabbing space-time in two separate places and somehow putting them together and gluing it with the negative energy. That's the part that people don't talk enough about as a big problem. Like how the hell are you supposed to do that? Because we live in the space-time. So you almost have to be outside of the space-time to create the wormhole in the first place. It's like a chicken and egg type problem. So, that still remains one of our most realized mathematical descriptions of what a wormhole might look like, in a sense for human beings to pass through. But recently there's been a lot of work looking at microscopic wormholes that could naturally emerge inside these black holes, especially charged black holes. If you put a bit of charge on them, it's thought that wormholes, microscopic Planck scale wormholes, are inevitable inside black holes. And that could be a way of explaining this information paradox that we talked about, because maybe the information tunnels out using these microscopic wormholes and somehow gets back out into the universe. So that's one of the leading ideas, actually, to solving this paradox, is that wormholes are real, but they're just very, very small, and they live on the interior of black holes and are a way of stuff getting out, basically.
Is there an alternate version of all of us on the other side of those wormholes?
I mean, possibly. I mean, it depends what kind of, for these microscopic ones, they really do live in kind of regular space-time, if you like. You don't have to do anything too exotic. But certainly for the original Einstein-Rosen bridge, or even to a certain extent what Kip Thorne had in mind, it's not obvious what that other universe is. Is it just a distant part of our universe? Is it a completely separate universe? It's never defined. You don't have to define it to write it down mathematically. You don't have to define what it is. You just have to say there is another space-time region, and you figure out what you want that to be, but that's all the math says. So you'd have to, I always think it'd be fascinating if I had the option of how to die and I could do anything I want in the universe. I think I would fall into a black hole, right? Because I think that would be amazing, because you would be the only you could know what's inside it, right? Because you can never send back out. Only those who fall through the event horizon know what's inside the black hole. And you could survive, in principle, for maybe a few hours for some of the big black holes, and you wouldn't be totally ripped apart immediately. You could pass through the event horizon, as Cooper showed us in Interstellar, and see what it's like. And I would, that would be awesome, because otherwise there's no way to know until someone does it.
I stopped at you won't be ripped apart immediately.
Yeah, you will eventually. Yeah, you will eventually be ripped apart. If you're okay with spaghettification at some point, maybe have a cyanide pill, and as you start to feel stretched, you're like, okay, this is the moment. I've seen enough at this point.
Spaghettification is our new focus here on the podcast. Are you familiar with the work of Donald Hoffman and his exploration that there is a space outside of space-time that controls the simulation, or you can take yourself out of his version of what he believes is reality, and that in so doing changes our ability to be constrained by the current laws of this space?
Well, some of those ideas ring a bell, but not specifically Hoffman's ideas. So maybe you can talk more about that. Yeah.
I don't know if I can summarize properly, honestly, but basically, his belief that this is a simulation and we're not living in a computer game, but that the world is simulated and our brain is constructing the reality around us.
And also at a very basic level, when we spoke to him, we titled the episode "Everything You See Is a Lie," because he took even the basic explanation of, how we perceive visual information. And, at the most basic level, we think that we are seeing the world, right? Like, this is how we're raised to see the world. But there is an alternate reality, right, which is all the wavelengths that are not absorbed, right, by all the things that we are, again, saying this is a table and this is a computer and I know what red is, right? So his sort of framework, comes from that everything you're seeing is filtered. It's filtered not just through, kind of brain structures, but it's filtered through, a construct.
Very helpful. And his belief is that, the thing next behind me isn't actually there until I turn to render it, and then it exists again. He is working with mathematicians and experts on the hard science that can create the ability to control our version of reality, basically manipulate the headset in his analogy. And so in so doing, that breaks open the limits of our physical limitations. And it could mean, moving about the world outside of the current limitations. And it could be changing our ability to, repair physically and so on and so on. But was just curious if like there's elements of the wormhole math that seem to overlap here.
Yeah, and also the holographic principle, it reminds me of. So yeah, with one of the discoveries of studying the mathematics of black holes is that it is possible to actually equate wormholes with quantum entanglement in certain descriptions of the universe. So this thing called anti-de Sitter space. If you write down the equations of what happens in anti-de Sitter space, you can basically have quantum entanglement on the boundary of this anti-de Sitter space look like wormholes on the interior, but the wormholes are just holograms. They're not really there. They're just projections of the quantum entanglement, and so you can kind of unify these two apparently disparate ideas, which both seem to allow for instant communication, as being just mirrors of the same thing, just different ways of thinking about them. And the holographic principle is got a lot of interest right now in physics, that if you extend this, then all 3D objects in the universe are actually just really projections of this 2D surface out into 3D universe. And I think it's amazing that seems to work. Like if you take the whole universe, the observable, the Hubble volume, and you just take that surface, you could take all the information that's inside that 3D volume and put it on the surface and it would fit on there exactly, which seems like really compelling argument for this holographic principle, which is obviously very disturbing for our own sense of who we are and what we see. Like nothing's really there.
One of the things that I wonder if you can speak to, and we've spoken a little bit about, sort of what popular technology has done to science in terms of information coming in many cases, anecdotal information. It's also introduced a lot of the conversation around sort of, what the government knows about, let's say, other aspects of our existence. And I think that one thing that we're seeing that is changing the way that science functions at all is AI. And I wonder if you can speak a little bit to some of the exciting things that AI is doing that impact science, and also some of the dangers of the entry of AI into sort of scientific rigor, reliability, and consistency.
Yeah, it's a very fast-moving train, and so my thoughts on this, like many people, are evolving almost daily as we see the capabilities change and the use cases change, and people try different things and make different mistakes and different successes. I have to say, up to about a month ago, personally, I wasn't really using AI very much. I know you said you don't use it at all. I was using it a little bit with ChatGPT for just sort of proofing things, maybe rewording some stuff, things like that. And then when I started using the more coding versions of it, like Claude Code, for instance, I was really kind of blown away, because I did a podcast about this, a solo episode where I went to Princeton, and they were all basically singing praises about how great this coding framework is, and that it was a better coder than they were. And these were very reputable software developers in terms of making astrophysics simulations and things. So I was really surprised by that. So I thought I'd try it out for myself. And I would say it's not such a question of it being better, but just way faster. I mean, it can just do stuff. You have the idea, and it would maybe take you a couple of days to put it together. It will just do it in an hour or two, but it will make mistakes, and then you spend another hour or two fixing those mistakes with it and identifying them. But even then, it's still 4 hours. It's still a much more efficient use of your time than spending 2 solid days banging your head against the wall trying to get it to work. So it's like many tools, like when the internet first came around, or Wikipedia, or when Python exploded in terms of its use amongst scientists. It's a tool that makes it easier for us to do the menial tasks that you often have to do in science to get to the interesting part.
Like completing your bibliography for your thesis, which almost made me give up on getting a doctorate.
Right. That's a very painful thing. That's one of the cases I'd be worried about using AI, actually, because I've noticed it seems to hallucinate references a lot. I don't know what is about references.
I don't care. I just needed something in those, 100 pages.
Right.
Like,
if you just want filler, it'll put something in there. Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead.
And no one reads the references anyway, so it probably doesn't even matter. But one note, I had a story recently because I was in Denver for an Exoplanet conference meeting, and a colleague spoke to me, and she said about AI that her student had written this really beautiful first draft of a paper, had really nice figures, the explanations were clear, and they submitted it to a journal and got the referee report back. And then the student she didn't admit this, but after much digging, it was found out this is what she did. She'd taken the referee report and the paper and put it into ChatGPT or whatever it was, and got back the next version of the paper. The whole thing. I mean, this is I think what you shouldn't do with AI. You shouldn't give it the entire damn thing and just say solve that. You need to really break it down. And so what she got out was absolute garbage. The paper was twice as long. All the figures were ruined, made no sense. And the advisor really had to prod her and be like, what tools did you use to do this? And eventually got it out of her that she had just literally copied and pasted the damn thing and ruined the project. And so they had to go all the way back and undo that damage. So I'm hearing both cases. I do think people who are more senior, like myself as scientists, know how to advise graduate students, know how to advise undergraduate students in research. We break down the problem into small bite-sized pieces for them, and then we let them do it, we test it, and we know the checks to do. We know these order of magnitude calculations. We get a piece of paper and we check, does that make sense? Yeah, that's in the right ballpark. That seems to make the right sense. We know how to do those checks. Whereas I think students coming in often aren't familiar with how to break down problems like that, and they have this overwhelming faith that it'll work, and it can be ruinous in those cases. So it is a tool that's very powerful, but can, in the wrong hands, can just lead to absolute nonsense. And of course, there's lots of journal papers which are being submitted right now, which are complete nonsense, which appear to be AI generated. So it's a big problem.
I mean, I've also heard of, students who are not using AI who also have to run things through an AI checker so it doesn't seem like you're using AI when you're not, which is incredibly maddening, because imagine being accused, right, of using AI when you've done the research and did not. I mean, that level, of kind of fear it's raising a very interesting generation of students, to say the least.
Yeah. And I think also you see it with sometimes with my videos, and maybe you've encountered this as well with YouTube. I think the YouTube audience is getting very frustrated with AI content, AI generated content, and the AI slop is like the slogan, right, that goes around. And sometimes you work really hard on a video. There's no AI involved in it whatsoever. You put it out, they'll watch the first 10 seconds and say AI slop, because they're so hit with so much of it, this avalanche of AI stuff. That their barometer has been almost desensitized a little bit to it, and so they just kind of call everything that surprises them. You make any kind of surprising statement and think, well, that must be AI. And so we're in this era of people just not trusting what they're seeing. And some people are probably watching this podcast thinking this whole thing's AI, but no, we're really talking to each other. Right?
We're all part of the simulation anyway, as we're hurtling towards a black hole.
Right. So it's having a big impact in public trust in science, in the use case of science. And of course, I think the greatest danger really is probably, as we've heard about many often in businesses as well, as interns and those sort of training of junior scientists, because it is so much cheaper and easier often to be lazy and just get the AI to do it rather than a graduate student, that I do worry about the exposure of graduate students to breaking down problems, because it's so tempting for senior people just to skip to the $20 a month answer rather than spending $100,000 a year to actually teach someone how to think.
Yeah, and this is something that if we ever do get to meet in person, I'd love to just chat with you over a beer, because as a undergrad and as a graduate student, I was trained to do all sorts of things that were mind-numbing and boring. You know, I learned to code. Like, I learned to code so we could process and smooth MRI scans to create a, you know, atlas of the human brain. And it's like, those were important hours, weeks, months, and years of my life. But I wonder, you know, how much are we learning versus how much do we need to automate so that our, you know, minds are, you know, ready for other challenges. Our producer Valerie and I both like cute things, and we'd like you to explain what a baby universe is, because A, it sounds cute, and B, I just think we need the explanation from you.
Yeah, I think, well, there is the idea that you could, there's many different contexts in which baby universes actually could emerge. There is this idea that our universe is not the only universe, called the multiverse. And it's often spoken about in terms of explaining, kind of come back to God almost, and like, you know, creation. Like, why is it that all the constants of nature seem to be perfectly balanced to allow for life? Because any kind of small perturbation to them would generally make atoms even impossible. So it's kind of wild that even anything is possible, you know, structure is possible at all. So some people might really lean on a creator to explain that, but a lot of scientists lean on this idea of a multiverse, that there's, you know, millions and millions, billions of universes out there, and they're in this higher hyperspace domain, maybe you call it the brain or the bulk or something, and they'll all be different sizes, and those sizes will ultimately be set by how fast they expand. So we have a cosmological constant which causes the universe to expand. And it's tuned at just the right rate, actually, coincidentally or not, that galaxies are possible. Because if you made the universe expand too quickly, everything would just fly apart and you'd never have anything. Like, we'd all just be dust, like spread out. But if you made the cosmological constant really small, then actually the universe would barely expand, and then it would come back down and crush. And so that might be a baby universe in that instance, like a very small universe that pops up, but it wouldn't live very long. It would just collapse back down into itself. And of course, we couldn't live in those baby universes because they wouldn't last long enough for galaxies or people to ever emerge. And similarly, we wouldn't emerge in the gigantic universes because they just spread apart too fast. And so this is kind of this anthropic reasoning to explain why does everything seem the way it is? Let's invent other universes. I think a lot of scientists are a bit uncomfortable with it. It's weird to say there's just loads of universes out there. That's how we get around of it. But it does avoid the God situation, which a lot of scientists are desperate to avoid that at all costs.
To speak to the sort of multiverse, you know, concept, we've had it explained to us, you know, in many ways that are elegant and beautiful and, you know, I think scientifically appropriate. But practically speaking, you know, what is your take? Like, if every electron has, you know, options for spin, and there are infinite numbers of ways, you know, my favorite example, you know, for me to get from here to this door, there's an infinite number of possibilities, one of which includes me jumping out the window, you know, flying to the Bahamas, you know, getting married and coming back and then, you know, exiting the door, right? What does that mean for the possibility of other versions of us, other opportunities, as Jonathan often describes it, sort of the sliding doors of our existence?
Yeah, it might be the last great demotion, or one of the last great demotions. I mean, we've had this sequence in history, Carl Sagan used to talk about this, of, you know, we used to think Earth was the center of the solar system, and then we realized actually the sun is the center of the solar system. We're just a planet that goes around it. And then we realized there isn't just the solar system. Each star is also another sun, which also, you know, and they have other planets, and that changed our view. We had to get demoted again. The solar system is not special. And then we thought the galaxy, the Milky Way, was all there was. And then we realized these other nebulae in the sky were actually other galaxies. And again, we got demoted. And so maybe in that sense, it's just natural that this will continue. And the idea that the universe is all there is again eventually going to slip away from us. And even the sense of self-identity that we are all there is, you know, I am the only version of me, will also have to evaporate, because if science has taught us anything, it's that every time we think we have the audacity to believe there's something special or unique about us, it will pull that away. It's the ultimate humility machine in that sense. So it would be very in keeping with the history of all of our advancements of understanding.
This was really fantastic. We're really so grateful for you to help walk us through some of the most basic and most complicated concepts in the universe and galaxy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Yeah, and you know what? My wife is such a big fan of your podcast.
Oh, thank you.
She was like, "You've got to do this one. Yeah, make sure." And I was like, "Yeah, we're doing it. Yeah, no, whatever."
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. You know, Jonathan, I think that Dr. Kipping is delightful. I think that his pronunciation of words is very elegant. He also used some super big words like perturbation, which is like perturb, but perturbation. Also, shout out to the word obliquity, like obliqueness.
Also, spaghettification.
Spaghettification?
You know what I'm going to say, actually? Anytime something feels uncomfortable, I'm going to say, this is starting to feel a lot like spaghettification. This conversation is spaghettifying me.
This felt like, honestly, a fantastic SAT list of words. Like, whatever happens at Cambridge that created this guy, it's working.
Next date night, let's jump into a black hole together and see what happens.
I do want to actually mention this. And, you know, a lot of what Dr. Kipping's lab, you know, explores is a lot of statistics. It's a lot of modeling. You know, it's a lot of mathematics.
I can't focus on what you're saying because Valerie just sent us a GIF of Will Smith being buried in a bowl of spaghetti and meatballs, which is the greatest thing I've ever seen.
We're trying to do an outro, and Valerie is showing us spaghettification. The conversation about black holes, the fact that we're having conversations that are literally based on equations is just, it's unbelievable to me. Like when Einstein was studying this, when we're talking about Carl Sagan's interpretations of these things, these are conversations about things that exist. We only know they exist because we have the mathematical explanation for why they can't exist. And that's why some people study physics.
I don't know. There's something about like trying to understand some of the firsthand accounts that like I want to sit down with the analysis of the craft that pilots have seen and recorded that are moving in ways that can't be explained. I want like a full review and like I want the physics. I want to understand the movement patterns. Like, has he reviewed all of that information? And yes, there is an overwhelming data that has been released by the government. And I understand the approach. And at the same time, like, I really want more of a reconciliation. He was hedging. Obviously, he doesn't want, you have to, I get it. You can't take a firsthand account. I get that.
The reason is that one of the only explanations is that there is a conspiracy, there is a government cover-up that is protecting us from having access to information about aliens. That is the explanation.
And he was like really open-minded, right? Like he wants to believe and needs the burden of proof. And also like we can't think that everything that's being shared is delusional. You know, like I can't imagine that these people are going in front of Congress and saying, this exists, this happened to me, and it's a mass shared delusion. Like that doesn't track for me.
I think that one of the things that's compelling, you know, is when we think about UFOs or UAPs, you know, whatever you'd like to call them, when we think about these things, for many of us, including myself, the only explanation, right, would be like, well, either this person's hallucinating and delusional or UFOs exist, right? Like those are my choices. But what's also true, and I don't think anyone would be surprised to learn this, is that there are many things that our government does experiments on. There are many things that our government is researching that they do not want the general public to know. There are many things from other countries that may be adversarial that are surfacing in our world that the government refuses to acknowledge. That's also a possibility. So while it is true that one possibility is that people are delusional or hallucinating or having some mass, mental illness that's, has some epidemic proportions, or there are aliens, right? And this is a flying saucer. The other answer is there is information that we do not know, that the government is not giving us. And you don't have to be a conspiracy theorist to believe that. But if we want an open and transparent economy, if we want an open and transparent defense system, yes, the government does need to tell us, what are you researching? I can handle it. I'm a big girl. I can handle whatever you're looking at. I can handle the truth.
Can you? Can you really handle it, though?
That's what Lou Elizondo is saying. Like, whatever fears the government pretends to be having, that, if we tell people that aliens exist, it's going to be mass hysteria and it's going to be like the purge, or like everybody could be like drinking Coca-Cola in the morning. Like, people will go crazy.
That's the example of people going crazy, just starting the day with a Coke.
I just mean whatever people might be trying to forgive the government. They're protecting you, like they're your daddy and they're going to protect you from all this information. I don't need that kind of protecting. I want to know what's happening. If you have evidence of a spaceship that is made of a material and you don't know how to make it, someone's making it. It's either Russia, China, like name the country, or it's from some place other than this place. Let's all talk about it. I want Dr. Kipping on it. I don't want all these people on the internet trying to explain it. I want scientists like Dr. Kipping and Adam Frank having access to this information and being able to say, guess what? This is carbon-based. This is silica-based. Like, I don't know. Let's do it. I'm ready for that revolution.
Yes, and it also goes to the Havana Syndrome energy weapon of it all, where it isn't extraterrestrial technology. It's actually technology that we didn't understand previously, but it was being deployed, and it was being deployed against us. So who has it? Where did it get developed? How is it being used? How do we know how to protect ourselves from it or treat people who it's been used on? And without more information, then we're at risk. So if there is technology and materials that we don't understand, it's true that it could be extraterrestrial, it could be something else, or it could be that there are advancements in science that we need to understand in order to keep pace with adversaries.
Keep pace with adversaries, a number one objective right now. Seriously.
It's important. One of my favorite lines and phrases he had was the misbehaving stars that he sees. Yeah, that's right. This one right here. And rocks falling from the sky, it was seen as crazy, right? You literally would have someone would have said, this is happening.
That's literally what happened.
The pilots who are seeing this upside down lightning, you may be like, what is happening up there? So I agree that there is so much more happening in our environment and in our atmosphere that we're still trying to understand. But that doesn't preclude there being extrasensory or other forces at play that we may not be able to understand. And it's true, like, there are no aliens on AM radios trying to be like, hey, Mayim, I want to connect with you. So, like, it makes sense that that's not the case. But there have been a lot of movement, space debris that's been seen out there that signifies that there could be things that we don't quite understand further than we can access.
Absolutely. And look, I think what Dr. Kipping is kind of showing us is that we need more information. We deserve more information, whether it's coming from the government or whether it's coming from the stars themselves.
Also, one thing that he talked about that I think is really important, and I really appreciated Robin Hansen's thought experiment, because there's science and then there's thought experiment. And the thought experiment helps us get out of the human-centric mentality that we're going to meet, an ET and they're going to come live with us and ride in our bike handlebar basket and then shoot us up to the moon. Like, It could be very well that they don't have a physical form, that it is more of a consciousness at this point, not being in physical form on Earth. Like, it could be that intelligent life, other places outside of Earth, doesn't have the physical representation that we have. And then if you start to think about that, then their movement, their ability to appear, that is totally different than we may have been imagining.
I mean, this would be the big cosmic joke, right? What if we could solve the issue of aliens and telepathy and extrasensory perception and energy fields? And what if there are beings that can communicate, but guess what? It's all through deep meditation. You can only access it when you're meditating. I don't know. Maybe that's how we get to that consciousness plane. Maybe they visit people on psilocybin journeys. DMT, Terrence McKenna said, the tiny little aliens.
Show everyone your shirt. What does it say at the top? Things I do in my spare time.
Really, really fun episode, Jonathan. Really, really glad we got to talk to Dr. Kipping, and the work that he does is incredible. Please join us over on Substack. There's going to be a lot of conversation about this over there in our breaker community. So please be part of it and contribute. We want to know what you think, what your experiences are, and how you can add to this larger body of knowledge that we're all collecting. And from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have. We'll see you next time.
It's Mayim Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or two. One fiction, and now she's gonna break